If you've ever looked at a textured blanket and wondered how the shape appears, this project will make it click. Hi friend, welcome, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make this mini heart blanket. This small demo teaches you the core techniques used in my Heartfelt Blanket pattern, including how to do the border, how to create the textured heart, how to use knit and purl stitches, how to read a simple stitch chart, and even how to fix mistakes without ripping out your whole project. We're going to start small because this fits on my crafting table and it makes it easier to grasp the concept with this practice. It takes just 2 skeins of Yarn Bee Eternal Bliss yarn, and then once you learn these skills, you can apply those same skills to make a full baby-sized blanket or the throw size. So let's get started. Okay, this is what a stitch chart or a pattern chart looks like. Let's go over some basics of how these work before we move on to the actual knitting. Here it is on screen. Feel free to grab a screenshot of this and use for yourself. Here, each cell or rectangle represents one stitch or one loop in your pattern. They are rectangles and not squares because a knit stitch is wider than it is tall. And then down here you'll see we have a key that explains what each symbol means. So if it's a blank square, that means we knit on the right side or purl on the wrong side. When we finger knit, we usually don't flip it over to the wrong side. We usually have the right side always facing up for the entire project. So for our project, this does not apply. Same with the purl, this dot. When there's a dot in there, it means it's a purl stitch. So it will purl on the right side or knit on the wrong side. We will not be flipping our project over. We will only be working on the right side. So for us, this is what makes sense. This is what we'll be doing. Just the right side. Okay, and then I have these little, the arrows or the carrots. This isn't a standard knitting symbol, but this is how I explain that we will skip a stitch and go to the next one, whether it's, going from right to left or from left to right. And then for this pattern, we will be doing what's called a drop stitch edge, or it just means we skip the first stitch of every row. So if you look here, so let's pick one side or the other. So all these edge stitches always begin by skipping the stitch, but also when we come back the other way, it'll always be a knit stitch. So this is called a selvage edge. So a selvage edge just means we have stitches on the edge or the border that are a little different than the rest of the pattern to give it a nice clean border. So in this case, our selvage edge is always to skip the first stitch, and we will always knit the last stitch. So that is how we get a really pretty crisp border. And then, so there's the selvage edges, explain these edge stitches here. And then let me just kind of outline this section here. Oops, there we go. So this square out here is a garter stitch border. So it's how we create that pretty border out here. And then obviously in here is the heart. And that is also garter stitch. So what is garter stitch? Garter stitch just means that we are alternating one row of knit, one row of purl, one row of knit, one row of purl. So that's how we create the garter stitch border. A nice thing about garter stitch is that it doesn't curl. So if you ever had your blankets kind of curl on the edges, as well as on the top kind of curls in, having a garter stitch border will stop that curling. So that's a nice benefit. So you'll see, yeah, so knit, knit, purl, and that continues up the border and the top as well. And the same with the heart. It's alternating a purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit. So that's how we create the pretty heart. And then the parts that are just all knits around here creates that smooth stockinette area. So stockinette stitch, stockinette equals all knits. Because knits are those smooth V's. The knit stitch creates a pretty V, and I'll show you that in a minute. And the garter stitch is a alternating knit row, purl row. Okay. I also want to note that this chart starts after our foundation chain. So we're going to have our foundation chain, down here going from left to right. And then we will start right here with the first row of knits, purls, and following the pattern up. So the chart is, you read it the same way you knit. So you start at the bottom and you zigzag your way up to the top. And then after we finish the last row, then we will do our bind off row afterwards. We'll be going, since this last row is from right to left, the bind off will be from left to right. All right, I hope I didn't confuse you too much there. Let's go ahead and jump in and start knitting. All right, I'm going to use Yarn Bee Eternal Bliss in this French lilac color. I've got 2 skeins for this little demo piece here. All right, I have a fresh chart here, and we can see I have it numbered down below how many stitches wide it is. It's 19 stitches wide. So we're going to start with a chain of 19. All right, first things first is always our slip knot. To do that, we identify our tail end here versus our working yarn, which comes from the ball. We put our working yarn on top of the tail and put that loop that we've just formed on top of the working yarn. Reach in to pinch and pull up a new loop. Then when you pull on the tail, it'll tighten that knot. And when you pull on the working yarn, it will tighten the loop. Okay, we want this loop to be about 3 fingers. Now let's make our chain. Our chain is going to be 19 loops. Okay, so put that loop on top of the working yarn, pinch and pull up a new loop. Let's measure it. These loops need to be fairly big, about 3 fingers. Lay it flat, pinch, pull up, measure, lay it flat, pinch, pull up, measure, lay it flat. Let's keep going. And to count them, count the top edge. That first slip knot counts as our first loop. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's 5 loops. We need to make a chain with 19 loops for this chart here. Okay, there we go. Here's 19 loops. It's important that these be big enough or the blanket will get bunched at the bottom edge and then it will start to flare out. So these loops on the bottom need to be much bigger than the loops in the rest of the blanket. All right, so now once you get this chain done, let's flip it down on its face. And you'll see on the back, you've got these little bumps in the middle, and we're going to work up under those bumps to create our first row of loops here. So that is the foundation chain. Now we can start row number 1. So row 1 starts here. So it's the row numbers are on the right for the odd numbers. So we start here. And this little arrow says to skip to the next stitch going from right to left. So we're going to skip the first one and then start knitting. So every stitch across is a knit stitch for that first row. So this is our first one that we're skipping. We start here, reach under that bump to pull up a new loop. There's one. And make sure we get all the bumps all the way across to the left. Here's the next one. It helps to put the ball over on the side that you're working towards so this yarn gets out of your way. And as I go, I kind of straighten it out each time, kind of help the chain is flat and the loops are pointing up. It helps me keep everything smooth and not getting twisted. So help get everything flat. Just work up under all of these bumps. So these loops are going to be a little smaller. They're not 3 fingers like the chain was. These are going to be more like a tight 2 or a 1.5 fingers. Okay, here we are, the last couple. Don't miss these last 2. Last one. Okay, so yeah, these loops should be smaller. These ones are only like 1.5 fingers. It's kind of snug to get a second finger in there. So these need to be smaller. So now that we've finished our first row, now we can lay it up this way. So now the chain doesn't have to be flat on the ground. It's going to go here, and all our loops are going to start forming up that way. Okay, so now it can be helpful to kind of, on your chart, check off each row as you go. So we did row 1. Now we're over on this side. This is row number 2. So row 2, we will skip to the next stitch, going from left to right. So we'll skip the first one, then we'll do purls all the way across until the last stitch is a knit. So let's do that. Pull out some extra yarn. Move my ball to the other side because that's the way we're going. Okay, so lay out the yarn. So this first loop, we're not doing anything with it. We're going to run the yarn behind it, behind that loop. And now starting with the second loop, we're going to purl. So if you've been doing this before, you'll know that having the yarn behind this loop and pulling it forward, that's a knit stitch. A purl is just the opposite. We're going to instead put this yarn in the front, so make sure you're not crossing in front of this first loop, going behind this first loop, but now we're going in front of all these other loops. And now we're going to push the yarn through. That's a purl. So a knit is pulling it forward, a purl is pushing it backwards. And so you'll see what that does. As we go across, we're pushing the yarn through, is it makes this old loop come forward instead of the other way. So it creates a different look, and it creates this little purl bump, we call it, and that's why we usually use a little dot to mark what is called a purl, because it looks kind of like the little purl bumps that are formed when we purl. So let's keep purling all the way across. Make sure, sometimes these first row loops like to twist, so make sure they're untwisted before you put the yarn in there. Okay, purl, push through, push through. And so there's a couple ways to control tension in a blanket. It's the size of the loops, so we're keeping these on the smaller side, as well as how close do you hold these loops together when you carry the yarn between them. So if you kind of put a big gap in there right here, that's a big gap that's going to make holes in your blanket. You can also pull it really tight together. So now there's a really small gap there. So it's the gap between the stitches as well as the size of the loops that control your tension in your blanket. So try to be consistent. I find that with garter stitch and you're mixing knits and purls, you want to keep it on the tighter side, a little bit tighter than you normally would for just all knits. Okay, we're coming up to the last, so that's a purl. Okay, so now we have one stitch left, and this last one needs to be a knit. So if we were purling it, we'd come from the front and push in this way. But if we purl the sides, the edges are going to be bumpy. So to make a nice, pretty, clean edge, we will put it to the back, the yarn back here. And these edge stitches also like to kind of curl to the side, so they're a little odd. And this first row is down here. So we're going to meet it by pulling it, meet it at the bottom, pull it up to be in line with this row, and then pull the yarn that's behind it to the front, and that would make it a knit. And also want these edge stitches to be a little bit longer. So these loops have been, 1.5 fingers. This one's probably gonna be more like 2.5 fingers, because we're not gonna knit it every row. We'll skip it on this next row here. So now we have finished row 2, so we can check it off. Now we're on to row 3, and it is also just skip that first stitch and knit all the way across. So again, let's do that. Put our yarn on the other side. Okay, here's the first stitch. We're skipping this one, putting the yarn behind the loops because we're knitting them. And then we start with the second stitch, and we just work our way across, knitting. Yeah, I find that garter stitch looks better if you keep the tension fairly tight. These, after doing a purl, the loops are kind of hidden in the back, so reach back there to grab that loop so you can knit. Okay, we're at the end here. Here's the last stitch. It's curling off to the side this way, so meet it at the side, bring it back forward, and then knit. Okay, now we're going back the other way. All right, so we just finished row 3. Check it off. Now row 4 is the same as row 2. It's going to be another row of skip the first stitch, purl all the way across, knit the last stitch. So here we are. So our yarn is in the back behind this stitch. We're going to skip it, but then we'll pull the yarn forward. Make sure you're not pulling it in front of this loop we're skipping. We're putting it behind the yarn. Behind. The yarn goes behind this edge loop and then comes to the front to start purling here. So put the yarn over in front of all these loops. This way. Here we are at the end. Again, this last stitch. If we were to purl, it'd be in the front and pushing it back, right? But we're not purling because that creates this bump in the front. We're putting it in the back and meet the stitch on the side, bring it forward, and grab that yarn from the back to knit. There we go. Make the edge loop a little bit bigger. Okay. So that is the first 4 rows. So that's how we've started that garter stitch border on the bottom edge. So you can see the fun garter stitch border with the bumps from the purl rows. And this won't curl, which is nice because garter stitch is a stitch that does not curl. And now we're going to do row number 5, which is the same as rows 1 and 3. It's just knit all the way across. And actually you'll notice all the odd rows are knit all the way across. They don't ever have anything special. So every time we go from right to left, it's always skip that first stitch and knit all the way across. So it's going from right to left is the easy side every time. So let's do row 5. Skip that first one and knit. All right, that's row number 5. So we'll see that row number 6 is the first one where we have, that we're starting the border, but then we're just knits in the middle and then the border again. So I'll show you how to flip back and forth between knits and purls. So first off, we're going to start by skipping that first stitch, and then we will purl 2, and we'll go from there. Okay, so skip that first stitch, yarn in the back, then bring it forward, purl 1, purl 2. Okay, and now we're going to knit all the way across until the last 3 stitches will be purl, purl, knit. So let's go all the way across with knits. So now that we've done 2 purls here, we need to switch the yarn to the back and then start knitting. Knit is just with the yarn in the back, pulling it forward. So now we can knit these middle stitches. All right, last 3 stitches, pull the yarn forward, purl, purl, and the last one's knit. So put it in the back again. Now we knit. Okay. So that was row number 6. Now you can kind of see how we go back and forth between knits and purl stitches and how we follow the chart back and forth. In a couple rows, we'll be getting to starting to form the heart by adding some purl stitches in the middle of the row. So let me get a few rows done and then we'll start doing the heart. All right, so I did row number 7. So now I'm going to start row 8, and it's skip, purl 2, and then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 knits, 1 purl, should be another 6 knits, and so on. So that's how you just read the chart. You can count across. And then in my patterns, I also have a written instructions row by row. So it's actually written out. Skip the first stitch, purl 2, knit 6, purl 1. If you don't want to be counting squares on the chart, you can also read it in the written portion of the pattern. So combining the charts and the written instructions can really be helpful. So let me do a few rows of this heart. I think you understand the gist now. And then I will show you what if you make a mistake. What if you purl a stitch that should have been knit or vice versa? I'll show you how you can go back and fix a single stitch without undoing the whole blanket. So we'll do that in just a moment. First, let me work on the heart a little bit. All right, I just finished row 13, and I purposely made a mistake a few rows back so we can learn how to fix it. You can see back here, this is a purl stitch when it should have been a knit. And so here I highlighted it on the chart. So it's this stitch right here, should have been a knit, but I made it a purl. So to fix something from a previous row, we don't have to rip it all the way back. We can just work on just one stitch here. And to do that, we need to identify going up which stitch we're on. So this loop here, we're going to work our way back down to here and fix this one and then rebuild it back up. So what we need to do, and we can do this with any knit or purl stitch if we ever have to just fix a stitch a few rows back. So what we're going to do, follow this ridge up here. So it's this loop that we need to undo. So we undid the one, we undo the next one, undo the next one, and keep working our way down until we get down to that stitch that was the purl. So it's this one here, so I've got to undo that one. Okay, so I undid the purl stitch, and now we just have to knit them all back up to fix it. Okay, so I take this bottom loop here, and take the one above it, and put it behind to make it a knit. If I needed to fix something and make it a purl, then I could go the opposite. So I can put the top one on top and push through. That would create a purl here. So we're undoing that. We're actually going to do all knits this time. So we're going to put the one up directly above this loop, put it behind, inside the loop, and pull it tight. Now it's a knit stitch. Grab the next one above it, put it behind this loop, pull to make it a knit, grab the next, put it inside, pull, and so on. So that's how we knit all the way up. And like I said, if you needed one of them to be a purl, you just go the other way. You put it in front and push it in. That makes it a purl stitch. But we need this to be a knit, so I'll make it a knit by going from behind. So you just recreated that column there. All right, so the purl stitch is gone and now it's a knit. Mistake is fixed. All right, let's keep working on our demo piece here. All right, it's time for me to join the next skein of yarn. When I do that, I cut a clean edge, even kind of brush the fluff backwards so that we get that excess fluff. If you need to trim some fluff off the edges, you can. That way we expose that plastic core that runs through the center. So that's one side. I'll do the same on the new one. We get two very clean edges. All right, so the trick with fusing is to melt the plastic core without burning the fluff if you can help it. We don't want to burn it, we just want to melt the core. So heat both sides a little bit. If it starts to burn too soon, you can blow it out and then fuse those cores together. Wait till they're cool enough to pinch with your fingers a little bit and then start to roll it in your fingers so that it's a rounder join in the middle. You'll be able to feel it's a little bit thicker where the plastic is joined in there. And once it feels cool again, then you can give it a good test, make sure it's strong, and then continue on. All right, I just finished up row 21 here. You might start to notice that the garter stitch section behaves a little differently than the stockinette section. Garter stitch really likes to kind of scrunch in vertically and expand widthwise. So if the heart's kind of scrunching down here, you can just give it a tug lengthwise to kind of even out those stitches and get it to match what the stockinette is doing. You can kind of tug on the edges too if those are bunching on the edge. So don't be afraid to kind of put this blanket and put the stitches where you need them to be. So, tug around a little bit to kind of even things out. And then you'll see that everything lays more flat. And you see the heart is kind of formed by these lines here. All right, and even down here on the border, you can even stretch that a little bit to see the garter stitch a little better, so it's not just kind of scrunched on itself. All right, it's looking pretty good. Starting to see the heart. All right, so now I just need to do row 22 to finish up the heart. So let's put the yarn on the other side. All right, so let's take a look. What we need to do, skip, purl, purl, knit 3, purl 2, knit 3, and so on. So let's do that. Skip this stitch. Remember, we always, when we skip the edge stitch, we skip it with the yarn in the back. We don't skip with the yarn in the front. So here, we skip it in the back, we do this. Skip in the front would be like this. Okay, so yarn in the back, but then we still bring it forward to do the purl for the border. So purl 2, okay, and then knit 3. So yarn to the back for knitting. 1, that's too big. 2, 3. Okay, and then we yarn to the front to purl. 1, 2. Yarn to the back to knit 3. 1, 2, 3. Yarn to the front to purl. 1, 2. Yarn to the back for 3. 1, 2, 3. And then we're back at the border, yarn to the front to purl 2. And that edge stitch again, yarn to the back because we're going to knit the edge, meet it at the side, bring it up and knit. Okay. All right. So I'm going to finish up these last few rows and then I will show you how to bind off. As I'm working on the blanket here, I wanted to stop and show you something real quick. I've done a few rows of stockinette, so that's, knit everything. And it starts to curl, if you notice that. I'm sure if you've made a few of these blankets, you notice that doing all knit stitches makes your blanket want to curl sometimes, especially if you're knitting it pretty tight. I've been knitting this pretty tight. And the reason why it does that is because you're pushing all the purl bumps to the back. The back side of the work has all the purls, and those take up more space than the knits do. So the purls kind of create a lot of pressure that forces the fabric to kind of curl this way. And so that's a totally normal behavior of stockinette, is it likes to curl. So that's one of the benefits of having a garter stitch border like this, where we're alternating a knit row, purl row. When you have garter stitch, because you're alternating which direction the purls are going, you don't have any curl. So garter stitch lays flat, which is great. So having a garter stitch border stops the curl. So that's why having a garter stitch border is a fun way to prevent that curl, and it looks pretty as well. All right, I'm going to keep going. All right, so that was row 28. Now here's the last row, 29. Just knit all the way across. And then it's time to bind off. All right, so now let's bind off our last row here. All right, so that was row 29. And now we're going to go back this way to bind off. So the bind off will be all knits. So we're going to knit this one, put it inside the previous loop, knit the next one. It's important for the bind off row to be a little bit bigger loops, so closer to 3, like the cast on or the foundation chain was about 3. The bind off loops need to be about 3 also. Let's put that inside the previous, knit the next one, put it inside the previous, and slowly start to close it off. If these loops are too small, the edge here will be very restrictive and tight. So we need to make sure these are big enough to stretch with the rest of the blanket. So I'm going to test it out as you go. See if it gives the way the rest of the blanket does. So you can adjust the size of these loops if you need to make it match. Too big also will make it too puffy as well. So there's a fine balance there. Another way for the bind off is to kind of just take this loop and overlap it over the next and pull the yarn through both of them. Same effect, just kind of skips the middleman. Just go straight to going through both of them instead of one then the other. Either way, same thing. All right, let's keep working across. Okay, last one here. Knit. Put it inside previous loop. Okay, so this last loop here, I actually just cut the yarn and just pull this loop through. There we go, and pull tight. Okay, it creates a knot. All right, and there we have our fun little mini heart with the garter stitch border. Beautiful. And then you just gotta hide these ends and you're all done. Good work. If you need to adjust, you can kind of make these loops a little bigger to kind of make them pop out a little more, you can do that to kind of give it more definition. Pull these out a little. There we go. And then smooth out the stockinette around it. Great. And here is a nice braided edge, the garter stitch. So that's a fun way to frame just about any blanket design. If you wanted to try this garter stitch, and you could just leave it all plain stockinette in the middle, or you could try other designs besides a heart. So many different ideas. And that's how you create a textured heart using only knit and purl stitches. Now you understand how the garter border works and how to create the heart with garter stitch as well, and how to fix mistakes along the way. So this is the same technique that I use in the Heartfelt Blanket pattern, just scaled up to baby size and throw size. If you enjoyed this tutorial and want to keep learning finger knitting techniques, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next project. Thanks so much for being here, and I'll see you in the next one.